listening to the Jersey Guys Podcast, the show that talks about hard rock, heavy metal, AOR, and West Coast music. In-depth conversation and special guests are always on tap, so settle in and turn it up. Now, here are your hosts, Tom and Mark.
Hey everybody, this is Mark Ballo from the Jersey Guys Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Tom Coyne, as always. Today we've got special guest John Macko from the band Fifth Angel. Welcome, John.
Hey guys, pleasure to be on the show.
Yeah,
nice
thank you,
John.
So, I guess let's get right into it, and we'll start talking about Fifth Angel, and we're going to go through the whole history of the band, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, I wanted to start off a question, and I know, going back to the debut Fifth Angel album, I know you didn't actually play on the first album. You came into the band shortly thereafter. Can you talk a little bit about how you, joined the band and got involved with the band?
Sure. Well, the first record was actually released on Mike Varney's label Shrapnel, and I was not in the band at that time. And then somehow, and I'm not quite sure, some people from Epic became interested in the band, and they basically bought the rights from Mike and re-released that first album. And that's about the time that I joined. So I kind of came on board like halfway through the negotiations when the band was getting signed to Epic CBS Records. And, I think it was just kind of a fluke. I was just at the right time, at the right place. I had just I had recently moved to Seattle from Los Angeles. I'm originally from Los Angeles area. And a friend of mine that was working in a music store told me about, he's like, hey, there's this, this band that I know, the guys, and they're getting signed to Epic Records, and they're looking for a bass player. But they never actually had a real bass player when they made that first record. So, I got in contact with one of the guys in the band, which was Ed Archer, and, I just sent him, a little promo package, and they had me come out and audition, and by stroke of luck, I got the gig. Now, I think that's kind of the short and simple.
Now, you mentioned that, the first album was released in 1986 on Shrapnel Records. And then
Correct.
The band eventually ended up, signing with Epic, CBS. And in 1988, they re-released the first album. What was the story behind why they wanted to do that?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Boy, if I had to guess, I think it's because, they thought it was a great record, which of course it was. And I don't think that they felt like they got that under Mike's label, that the album got the proper distribution or maybe marketing. So they kind of felt by, I think they remastered it, and, then there was new artwork, and they wanted to kind of push that record, to maybe just get a little more life while we were working on what would be the second record. I think that's the reason why, but I can't be 100% sure.
Okay.
Well, I kind of think, John, from what I had heard at the time, that the mix, the original mix that was on the Shrapnel vinyl and what came out on the major label, there was a little bit of a difference in the mix of the two albums.
I don't think. That probably sounds right, because if you listen to the original Shrapnel recording, it's not great.
Right, I have both of them, and there is a difference.
But I don't think it was remixed. I think it was only remastered.
Okay.
But don't quote me on that.
Yeah, no, that's what I thought too. And
Yeah.
in fact, I was just talking with Mark before we went on the air. I actually heard the band for the first time on a local college radio station in our area in 1985. And it was before the record came out, because I went to my friend who owned a record store at the time, and it was bugging him about this Fifth Angel. And he was like, it doesn't appear on any list. It's not out. And it wasn't out at the time. But original mix of it or mastering of it, if you listen, it's not really explicit, but if you listen to it, there is a difference between the two. It's somewhat noticeable.
Yeah, I would definitely agree.
So going back to that record, I know that you were not the one that played on it, but you certainly were involved in it. This was a band at the time that all the way in Brooklyn, New York, I could tell you there was a big buzz on. There was a lot of people that it took by surprise, because myself personally, you guys were a band on this record and the second record that really didn't sound like anybody else, which in an era of the mid to later 80s, there were a lot of bands that sounded like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden. There were a lot of bands by then that sounded like Queensryche, but Fifth Angel always sounded totally different. I think it was a combination of the songwriting and Ted Pilot's vocals, which at the time nobody sounded like him, and to this day nobody sounds like him.
I know.
And it kind of sets you guys apart. And I think it's really what has added to the mystique of the band all these years, is because the songwriting, I just redigested the second album, which I've heard a million times, but I wanted to listen to it again this past weekend. And the songwriting is not only so strong, but it's not cliched. It doesn't have any of the late 80s cliches. And between that and Pilot's vocals, it kind of really set the band apart from almost every band of its time. Would you agree?
I would, and I think that's why I still personally really enjoy both those records, especially the first album. But I still don't get tired of listening to it or playing those songs.
Right.
And I'll be real honest. A lot of people probably be surprised to hear this. I really don't like 80s music or 80s metal all that much. I don't listen to it now. I mean, I listen to more modern metal, but when it comes to Fifth Angel, I still love all of those songs from those two records. And yeah, you're right. We don't really sound, I mean, yeah, there's some elements, here and there, of the style, from the time, but it's definitely identifiable. Like when you hear a Fifth Angel song, it's a Fifth Angel song.
Exactly.
You're not going, well, is that Motley Crue or is that Kix or one of those other bands, not knocking them, where it's you're not quite sure, but it's definitely a very distinct sound, and it's a combination of Ted's voice and the songwriting, and just kind of the input from the musicians that are that contribute to those records.
Well, you had two things going for you, and this is for somebody that, as Mark could attest to, probably knows every band from that era going forward. You had two things going for you. You had two albums that didn't contain one cringeworthy song. The writing was exemplary and beyond reproach of everybody else at the time, in my opinion. And you had a singer who was not only good, there were a lot of good singers at that time, but you had a singer that nobody sounded like, which is a great thing to go forward with.
Now, talking about the first album, and Tom mentioned and you said that there didn't really sound like anybody else, but from a standpoint of like, say, songwriting, and I know that you weren't involved in that maybe in the beginning, but who would you compare Fifth Angel to as far as being influenced by sound wise at the time?
Well, I can only repeat like what the other guys said, were the influences, and I would say probably like Dio, Iron Maiden. I don't know about Judas Priest, but I would say at least those two bands is what I noticed like when I first joined the band,
Right.
because they would be like, play, like on the bass stuff, it'd be like, play like Steve Harris, or, we really like the way Steve Harris plays. And so, yeah, it was kind of those were kind of the main influences, that I can recall.
And I think James Bird was very big into Uli John Roth from the early Scorpions stuff.
Well, I don't know about that, but he was definitely an Yngwie.
Yngwie, and I think Blackmore too. He was it too.
Yeah, he was. James was really influenced with Yngwie. Matter of fact, I think they're like buddies. Now, Kendall, who did all the lead work on Time Will Tell, he's definitely. Well, no, I'm thinking of Michael Schenker. Kendall was really influenced with Michael Schenker, but yeah, I think you're right. James is Uli and Yngwie. Well, basically that the neoclassical.
The neoclassical, yeah.
Yeah.
James was a great player at that time in '85. There weren't that many USA players. Maybe Steve Vai was on that level. Most of the guys that had that real high-end technique were European guys. And James was a guy that came out of nowhere and got a lot of people's attention with his technique.
Yeah, well, and more importantly than the technique, it was what he composed on those leads. And that's really, I think that's the biggest thing that's missing in today's world is, everybody now can play like Eddie Van Halen and just play all this, shredding stuff. But but they all sound the same, and there's no, there's no composure, to the solos.
Phrasing. Yes, absolutely.
The phrasing and that's what James was really good. Like, you listen to his leads on that first record and it's like a little mini composition.
Yes, they're very melodic and he played for the song. Even though there was a lot of technical prowess, those leads like moved you through the course of the song. Right.
And that is really an art form that's very difficult to find.
It is. It is. And it's very lost in today's day and age because, me and Mark both follow a lot of the classic metal bands that are still around and a lot of the new ones. And you're right. The Shred Fest has 30, 40 years after the fact become, commonplace. It's not doesn't grab you by the throat the way it did. But now it's could you come up with a melody or something, a hook, and most of these guys can't. It's just playing 1,000 notes a minute.
Right. And I'm so tired of it. I'm just like, next.
I am too. I am too.
I don't even want to listen to it. On Facebook. That's there's this guy, and it's like, and he's sitting in his room, and he starts going
right, and that's what it starts to sound like after a while.
I just turn it off. I'm like, I don't want to hear it. Like, let me actually hear a solo that like says something and has melody. And has a great choice of notes and phrasing. That's what makes it, a great lead solo.
Well, Ritchie Blackmore always said it was all about the song. Without the song, it was... And I think what made Bird such a great player is that he was into the Schenker and the Uli John Roth, the Ritchie Blackmore, guys that played like that for the song, played with bands that had great songs, great singers, and great hooks. And another band from Seattle like that. If you've ever read up or listened to any of the interviews, Queensryche at the beginning also were bands that were a band that were very influenced by the European bands, not the American bands.
Right, and of course, their music was all very melodic.
Exactly.
So both of the bands. We knew all those guys. We were friends with them, and especially Ken and Ted and Ed. They went. They grew up with those guys in the Seattle Bellevue area. They all knew each other. They were all in garage bands, and all that stuff. So they all had the same kind of influence.
Right. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was moving on to the second album. And I think you may have answered this a minute ago, but you talked about Kendall doing the leads on the second album, and you guys covered Lights Out by the band UFO. Obviously you mentioned a minute ago about Kendall being influenced by Michael Schenker. Is that the reason that you guys covered that song?
No, I just think that for whatever reason we just picked that song.
Okay.
But no, it wasn't because hey, we can showcase Kendall. Yeah, it wasn't like that.
Okay. I mean, it's a pretty cool song to do because you really don't hear a lot of bands cover that song as much as UFO is. It's a very influential band. You don't really hear that on people covering their songs.
And it's a great version. I mean, I listened to it and it's like, man, this is a great version.
It really is. Yeah.
It is, again, because of Pilot's vocals. Because it was cool to hear him sing it, because it didn't sound like the typical clone UFO cover.
Right. And then we put like a key change in it, which
Yes.
the original doesn't do.
Exactly.
To spice it up. But
Right.
we use that song to close our live shows. And it's just a great encore song.
You kind of fifth angeled UFO song. Yes.
We do that with everything.
So I wanted to ask you, how did you get Kendall? How did you recruit him? Because I know James left, and there's I'm actually pretty good friends with James off of Facebook, and I know there's a lot of stuff out there, reasons why he left. Yeah. And I don't want to belabor that, but what I really wanted to know more, because I don't know, is how did you recruit Kendall?
So after James had left the band, we had gotten a recommendation for Kendall by one of our Seattle friends, Kelly Gray. And, Kelly is a, local, he's a, producer, and, he played with Queensryche,
right.
That kind of thing. But anyway, so Kendall and Kelly were really good friends. So Kelly's like, he's like, oh, you gotta go check out Kendall. He's the guy. So, I actually went out to Kendall's house and, sat down with him, and he played for me, and I was like, damn, this guy's good.
Yeah, he's real good.
I think I gave him, hey, learn these 3 or 4 songs, and we had him come out, and he just blew us away. So it was pretty obvious choice. We had auditioned a couple other guys, but he was clearly just the best.
He was a find. I mean,
yeah.
I was, we had already heard, my friends and myself at the time, that James was out, and it kind of was like, oh my God, is this the end of what that band was? And there was no letdown as far as I'm concerned. Now, I mean, I'll be totally honest with you. I was somebody at the time that was on the pulse of this stuff, and there were people that felt that the album was more commercial or too commercial compared to the first album, which I guess in some respects it is, but I looked at it more as being better produced and a little bit more, a step up with the time of 1989 compared to 1985.
I would agree. It's definitely a more commercial, vibe on some of the tracks. Some of that was, like you said, some of it was just kind of, at that point, you got bands like Scorpions and Whitesnake, that are, selling platinum. And of course, the record label, that's what they wanted, and that was the direction that they felt, would produce, record sales. So I think we were, somewhat influenced by that whole environment. Honestly, I wish that we would have kind of just stuck to our guns and done the second record more like the first album. But, it is what it is. It's still a great album. And, you have a lot of people that like that album better than the first album. But I think the majority of people like that first album better. But in regards to the two guitar players, it's not like apples for apples. They're just two totally different animals, two totally different players. And so I think, it's a great, it's a great thing where that we were able to share the talent of these two different types of players.
Right. And not skip a beat in terms of quality, because again, what you had going for you was the great songwriting.
Right.
No, there was on that second album, because I just re-listened to it from beginning to end on Sunday afternoon. There's not one song that's a filler on it, not one. And again, with Pilot's vocals and a different guitar player with a somewhat different style, but
it still works.
It definitely worked. Definitely worked. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to ask you, Fifth Angel, I heard or read a story that you guys were almost going to tour with Ozzy in 1989 for the second album, but it never quite happened. Did the band actually do a lot of touring outside of the Northwest, Pacific Northwest?
No. It's just, for whatever reason, that always fell through. We were, and I'm not sure about with Ozzy, but I believe that we were going to go on a leg with I want to say Scorpions maybe, or maybe Accept. I mean it was really really good, and it fell through for whatever reason. I don't even remember why it fell through. So I don't know. That's always been a real sore spot, at least for me, that the band never really was able to get out there and tour like we should have. And then of course, the whole industry, basically flipped.
Yeah, the whole change in the scene and the sound.
Yeah, in the early '90s, when Nirvana came out, that was it.
You must have seen that coming, being a Seattle-based band, right?
No, no, I didn't.
Wow.
Didn't. No, I was blindsided because honestly, at that time, these quote unquote grunge bands, they, from our standpoint, they were like glorified garage band musicians. Like they were like garage bands.
Yeah, that's a perfect description.
I didn't get it, which is really too bad. But I'm thinking, these are like, crappy garage bands, and, they're never going to go anywhere. Well, of course I was proven wrong. So no, I think all of us that kind of, came up in the mid 80s were really kind of shocked from that.
Right.
Unfortunately, you got taken down by bands that really weren't anything like your band. It was just too much of the bubblegum pop, makeup, spandex bands. I think that record companies felt the best way to come up with the next big thing is to go completely away from that, which unfortunately your band, as a lot of other guys took the brunt of it for no good reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it was, and that I don't think that was anything that was actually planned by the record companies. I think that this underground scene that was, coming up from Seattle got their attention, and I think that they probably recognized that in the increased sales for all these quote unquote indie labels. Like when those labels first started, they're selling 500 copies,
Right.
800 copies. Well, all of a sudden those started turning into much larger figures. And I think that probably grabbed the attention of, some of the larger companies, and like, hey, something's going on here. And then when Nirvana made that record, bam, it just blew up. So at that point, they're like, we'll dump, we'll dump all this other stuff, and they're gonna hop on, whatever the latest bandwagon is. So I don't know.
I did want to talk to you on the second album about certain songs and what the writing process was. Again, for the strength of this album, to look at songs like "Wait for Me" and "Angel of Mercy," which were the 7th and 8th tracks on the record, it's incredible. When you guys went in and started writing this record, how did these songs all come about? How did these masterpieces all come about?
Well, of course, back in those days, everything was done kind of face to face, because we didn't have, computers. But basically, I mean, it was kind of the same process that happened with the first album. So on the first album, Ted, Ed, and James, they'd all get together at somebody's house, with like an acoustic guitar, and a tape recorder, and just start, going through ideas. And the process was very similar on the second record. I was involved a little bit. Now, like you said, the song "Wait for Me," I wrote that chorus section.
Right, you have writing credits on it.
But it was basically the same. It was kind of the same thing, Ted and Ed would get together over at Ted's house and just kind of start going through ideas. I would join some of those sessions, but not all of them. And that's basic. Ed would come up with a guitar riff or something, and then sit down with Ted, and Ted would sing a melody or something. And so it was all very organic, I guess would be the term. That's really, and then we would get together and kind of rehearse the ideas and kind of firm parts up and that kind of thing. And then that was it. And then just go into the studio.
Now, where was the second album was recorded in New York, right?
It was a little over everywhere. So drums were recorded in Manhattan, at the studio that I think it was called Metro. I don't know. I don't think it's not even there anymore. That was a lot of fun. They were recorded there. Then most of all the other tracks were recorded in Stamford, Connecticut at the Carriage House. We basically just lived there for about 3 weeks. And then we did a little bit of like touch up stuff like back in Seattle, keyboards. I actually played all the keyboards on the Time Will Tell record. And then it was mixed and mastered in Toronto.
Now, what was it like working with Terry Brown on that album as for the producer?
He was a lot of fun. I mean, I could talk for hours about all kinds of stories. But he was a character. But but he had certain ways of doing things. Now the first record, that record was made with Terry Date,
Right.
and but I don't know if you guys know this, but that first record, that was Terry Date's first record that he produced.
That I didn't know.
That started
Yeah.
his career. But on the now on the album it says produced by Terry Date, but to be honest, it was more co-produced. Ted and Ed and Ken also, I believe, they produced it with Terry. So there's a lot of the production and all that influence is actually from the band members and not Terry. But so when on the second record, when we worked with Terry Brown, he didn't really relinquish that kind of control
Right.
to the band members. He was pretty firm about it, and there was a little bit of headbutting on some things, but in general, it was a lot of fun. I mean, we just had a lot of fun. I mean, I can still hear his voice, with that English accent, and he'd come up with the funniest shit. And then when we were working in Manhattan, he had Max Norman would come into the studio, and Max was helping Terry with some computer stuff when we were doing the basics. I remember there was, we had this drum set that we used. It was one of Eric Carr's drums kits, with the big, kick drums that were really long. And, and there was all these mics and everything. And I don't know, there was one of the stage hands or something that was kind of going out there. And Terry Brown, he's like, what's he doing? Oh my God. I can't believe it. He's touching the overheads.
That's great.
Hey, what is he doing? It was just funny. And then we had like 12-hour days, in the studio there. And then we go next door, to there was a little pub next door, and with Max and Terry, and then we'd hear all these stories, about, when Terry was working with Rush. And then Max would tell us stories about when he first started doing live audio engineering. He worked for AC/DC, and he was telling us stories about that. It was really fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. That sounds like some great stories.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, I mean, the second album comes out, and you say the scene changes. The band gets dropped by Epic Records, right?
I know.
And then
we made this great record, and it was going up in the metal charts, and then it's just like pulling the rug from underneath your feet. It was it was. So again, it was bad timing. If we had released that album, let's say 2 years earlier, I think everything that would have changed everything. I think the band would have gotten, the shot that it deserved, but it was just bad timing. It was, it was released at the end of '89, right?
Yeah.
And then 1990, boom, that's Nirvana. I think like 6 months later, Nirvana releases "Smell Like Teen Spirit," and that's all it took.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Now, basically, so I guess at that point, I mean, did everybody just go their separate ways? And
well, we tried to make a little bit of a go of it, and it failed. And then everybody, just basically gave up and went their separate ways. Yeah.
So now, like 20 years go by, right? And 2010 comes along, and you guys get an offer to play a festival in Europe, right? How did that all come about?
Well, in the summer of 2009, I received, I had moved from Seattle to Florida, and I'd been living here in Florida, which is where I'm still at. And one day I get a call from, this guy in Germany, and he says, well, I'm My name is Oliver, and I'm a promoter of this festival that we have every year called Keep It True. And, the festival has bands, old school metal bands, and we would like to have Fifth Angel play next year and headline.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, I said, I don't think anybody's interested in this band, nowadays. He goes, oh, you'd be surprised. What am I going to say? I'm like, well, okay, I still talk to a couple of the guys once in a while, but I don't know. So anyway, I told him, hey, thanks for calling. Check back with me in a couple weeks. I'll try to get a hold of the guys and see if that's something they'd be interested in. So yeah, that's how that whole thing came about.
Now, who was involved with the band at that point when you put it back together to play that show?
Originally Ted was going to do it, Kendall, Ed, and myself. So that would have been, four of the original 4 out of the 5.
Right.
When I talked to Ken about it, he just wasn't interested. He was just like flat out not interested, for whatever reason. So we had another drummer, Jeff McCormick, local Seattle guy, that said he would do it. So that was the lineup. Let's say, we decided that we told the guy that we would do the festival in that fall or at the end of summer, whenever it was.
Right.
And everybody, said everybody committed to doing it. So we kind of agreed that at the beginning of 2010, like in January, we would start rehearsing and we would make arrangements, to make that happen. And then when it came to that time, Ted changed his mind and said, no, I'm not going to do it. So we wound up, which is a long story, but we wound up hiring another guy, and he didn't work out. And then kind of at the last minute, we got this other guy named Peter who had done some shows with the band Heir Apparent, and Jeff McCormick, the drummer, was also in Heir Apparent, and Jeff recommended that we get Peter. So kind of at the last minute, we grabbed Peter, and then we went and played that festival with that lineup. So it was only the 3 out of the 5 original.
Right.
Was there any seriousness on the part of Ted everybody knows, it's well documented that he's a dentist. I'm not going to get into that, but was there any seriousness as to that he was really going to break away from that and do an overseas gig?
No, we thought he said he had committed, so we thought he was going to do it. And so we were very disappointed, to say the least, when he said that, he goes, I just can't do it. So that was definitely kind of a blow. But, we still went over there and we pulled it off. Know how great we were, but we pulled it off enough to where, we got invited back in 2017.
Now, was there talk at any point? After that 2010 show, did it re-energize the members that were there to say, hey, maybe let's talk about doing some new material?
Yeah, it did, and we kind of spent a couple 2-3 years afterwards, trying to make that happen, and it just failed every time. We just couldn't seem to make it work. So it was really what then kind of got things going back again was when Ken Mary, his interests sparked, and Ken called Ed and myself, and he was like, hey, you know what, I'd really like to try to make this work again. Let's give this a shot. So that is really what got the ball going. And then when we went back to Germany, and we played that festival, that Keep It True festival again. And we were much better that second time. We were much better prepared, and that performance was enough to get interest from Nuclear Blast.
Okay.
And after that performance, I was backstage, and then Jaap Walkmaker, he's the head of A&R for Nuclear Blast, came back and started talking to me. He was like, "Hey, that was a fantastic show." He said, "I've been a big fan of the band for 20 years." And he handed me his card, and he said, "Hey, let's do a record." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, sure."
Now, who was involved? Who was in the band at that period when you guys played?
Okay, so at that time it was myself, Ed, Ken, and Kendall.
And Kendall sang at that gig?
No, Peter did.
Okay.
Yeah, Peter sang at that gig the second time as well. But yeah, so that's after that 2017 show. That's when the ball really started to roll again.
Now, what changed from the 2017 lineup that ultimately ended up recording the new album, The Third Secret? How did the lineup evolve from there?
Okay, well, so after the 2017 show, we went home, and and we started working on some demos. Now, but what we kind of discovered with Peter is, Peter's really good live, but when we recorded some of these songs with Peter, his voice didn't translate. It's like his voice just didn't match the music, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure.
And it's you know what I mean? And that, that's the weird thing about the human voice, is that, you got, the human voice sounds, one way live, and it could sound completely different recorded, and vice versa. And it's not always the same. And obviously the voice has to match the music. Mm-hmm. And the feedback, that we were getting was just, this just doesn't sound like Fifth Angel. So that's when we decided to, Ken's like, well, you know what? He goes, Kendall's a really damn good singer. Why, let's give Kendall a shot, if he's up to it. So, we asked Kendall, he's like, sure. So we recorded 3 songs. We did 3 demos with Kendall singing, and sent that to Nuclear Blast, and they signed us off of those three demos.
Which his voice has a lot of Dio overtones to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is never a bad thing.
No. It's not Ted Pilot, but I've spent, the band, we have spent, so much time looking for a Ted Pilot quote unquote clone, and it's just we come up empty-handed every time.
And it's no shortcoming to all of you guys, from James Bird right to the present lineup. It's the little thing that really did set the band apart, was his vocal phrasing and the sound of his voice, because nobody sounded like him.
Right, yeah.
And it wasn't anything like falsetto, like it was just, he was a guy that didn't sing in crazy ranges.
Right.
He just had he had a super cool tone, and it happened to be nobody sounds like him. Right. And it's just one of those weird things. So it's really was a smart move on your band's part to go the route of not even trying to get a clone. And if you had a guy that was sounded like Dio, nobody's ever been accused of that being a bad thing.
Right. And I think The Third Secret, it's a great album too. Now whether it's as good as those first 2 albums, but that's debatable. But I think it stands
It stands. It definitely stands with them.
Yeah, and it's a great album. I think that there's probably a few songs on there that are that are that are fillers or whatever, but I would say the majority of the songs on that record are very good, and there's some great songs.
The song for me that when I listened to the record the first time really brought back the sound of the second record is "We Will Rise."
Yeah.
That sounded like a track on the second record. And that's when I heard that song, I was like, oh boy, these guys are back, because that song had the whole vibe of Time Will Tell.
And that was a song that was written by Ed Archer. But, going off of the question you asked me earlier about the lineup change. So one of the other issues that we had right when we were working on the third secret is that Ed, because of personal issues, had to take a hiatus, and so that was also a little bit of a crippling blow. So that just really left the three of us to make this whole record. Ken and Kendall kind of becoming like the new songwriting partners, and they did very well, but it is a little bit of a departure, from those other two albums. But it is what it is. You can't recreate the past.
No, and it's 30 years later. I don't think anybody would want to hear
and that's
that.
one of the great things is when you capture magic, that's what makes it magic. You can never go back and do it all over again.
No.
And both of those albums were magical albums, in my opinion, of that era. And all these years later, it's almost like chasing fool's gold to say we're going to do, an exact part 3 of that, especially with the lead singer out of the picture. So you almost have to develop your own identity going forward, yet holding some of those characteristics of what made Fifth Angel Fifth Angel.
Correct. And that's what we strived to do on that record. And I think we did it to a certain degree.
The album went over really well. I mean, I was plugged into virtually everybody with this record, and people liked it. I liked it a lot. I honestly, it exceeded my expectations, because there's been so many bands from that era that have come back over the years, and 9 out of 10 times it's a huge letdown. And I didn't know what to expect, especially with the guitar player singing now. And it way exceeded my expectations of what I thought.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it fits in very snugly after the first 2 records. It's to me it's a progression from those in the sense that the band has changed a bit and the times have changed a bit, and it's a terrific record.
Yeah, well, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm proud of it, definitely.
So that leads us to one thing that I don't know anything about. This is one thing where it's a longtime fan that you could help me out. What happened with Kendall? Why is he not involved anymore?
He had some. Well, he quit. I don't. And there really isn't even any good reason, but that in my mind, but. He just had some disagreements about how things were being run in the band. It's really a shame, because we would love to have him still in the band because he is so talented. The guy he's just amazing. He's an incredible guitar player. He's a great songwriter, and he can sing.
Yeah.
And he's a great singer. And he's a great guy, but he's got his kind of view of how things should be, and it wasn't lining up with what how we were conducting business. I guess I could say it that way.
Okay.
That's fair enough.
So he just said, "Okay, I'm out of here."
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about the Third Secret, the title, and also the artwork on the cover of the album.
Yeah, it's
Because a lot of
cool,
people
isn't
probably
that?
don't. Yeah, it's great. I mean, a lot of people probably don't know what that even is.
Okay, so the Third Secret, it was actually kind of Ken's idea. So the Third Secret is actually based off of a true story. It's the story of Fatima, and or the Lady of Fatima. I don't know. Do you guys know that story?
A little bit, and I read about it
Okay,
just a little bit to familiarize
right.
myself. But it's
It's
from Portugal, right?
It's. I mean, according to the Catholic Church, it's a documented miracle. So basically, the story is three children in Portugal were visited by the Virgin Mary, her ghost or whatever, and if you believe in that sort of thing,
Right.
and and these three children would experience that they go out and she would talk to them and stuff like that, and so that's what kind of inspired that song. And in the description, so and I'm trying to think of it, because you can actually look it up. Like if you go like on Wikipedia,
Right.
and you look up. Okay. So yeah, the story is that the Virgin Mary is that she basically reveals these three secrets, which are kind of like prophecy type of things,
Right.
and each one has its own thing. So, and you can look it up. So if you look up the Third Secret of Fatima, so there's a description on the third. So she reveals that on this third secret that there, and it's a description, and that's what the artwork is from. So the description is that there is an angel, that's that's hovering above the ground, and he has a sword, and then she is next to him, and beneath them is basically like the pits of hell, and then behind them is like a parade of martyrs going up a hill, and like they all get slaughtered, and I mean it's pretty graphic, but the artwork is from that description.
Okay.
And we basically so we found one of the guys at Nuclear Blast, when we were looking at different artists, he found this artist. We were going to have this one guy, and then he fell through. And then one of the production managers there said, "Hey, I know this young Czechoslovakian artist, and her name is Zofia." And so we got in contact with Zofia, and we sent her a description. I think basically just kind of cut and pasted from that description, and we want something like that. And then like literally she came back with that type of artwork, and we were like, okay, yeah, she's got it, and then we just kind of tweaked everything, so in the description, there's a star that falls from heaven, so little bits, like in Stars Are Falling, and in the artwork. But yeah, that's what the Third Secret's about. And then the one song that Kendall wrote on there called Fatima.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys listened to that. It's a very different song, but I think it's probably like one of the coolest tracks. It is just an amazing
That
song.
really is. And Can You Hear Me is another a song that I like a lot.
Yeah, that's a great
on the
song
record.
too. So yeah, so that's kind of the whole thing. I'm not going to say it's a concept album, but it is a little bit. But it's not like every single song. You know what I mean? But that's kind of the general concept of that record, and that was kind of all Ken's idea.
So if we could just talk a little bit about the current lineup and new material. We spoke a drop about it off the record before we went on, about
Sure.
your new singer, Ethan, the lead guitar player, who Mark and I are both familiar with. We actually saw him open up for Joe Lynn Turner about 4 or 5 years ago, and were blown away of what a great player he was.
Yeah, yeah, he's really good. So, how those guys came into the band, we after the record, shortly after the record was released in the fall of 2018, and kind of upon that, we scheduled to headline another festival in February, in Germany, and then Kendall quit right about this time in 2018, basically about a month and a half before that show. So we were originally going to go over as a 4-piece. So Kendall left the band, so that means we had to find a singer and a guitar player. So so we kind of put the word out, and got audition tapes from various people around the country, and Ethan was one of them, and I didn't know Ethan, but I knew of him because he was in this band Angels of Babylon with Dave Ellefson from Megadeth, and I had kind of been familiar following some of his work, so I was like, yeah, this is the guy.
I think that was that Rob Rock's band.
Angels of Babylon?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Dave was in the band, and then Elson, and then there was a singer named Dave Feefolt was also.
Okay, that's who I'm thinking of. Rob
Dave
Rock,
Feefolt.
Dave Feefolt. Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. Yeah, Dave Feefolt. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Ethan. So that was kind of a no-brainer. Bringing Ethan in, and then as far as the singer, Steve Carlson. That was well, the funny thing is that, like, I've known Steve for probably like 35 years, coming from Seattle. Steve used to, because a lot of us played in, club bands. And Steve was kind of like the king of the club band circuit back in the 80s. And so I never really knew him. And he had relocated to Phoenix. Well, there was a radio DJ, this guy Mike Gobby, down in Tucson, who's buddies with Ken, and Mike's the one that recommended Steve. And Steve was doing some like tribute bands, and Ken went out and saw him, and he said, "Hey, the guy is really good." So Ken brought him into the studio and had him sing to some of the old songs, and he just sounded great. So that's kind of how we found those two guys. They had about a month to prepare for that headlining show, so it was a lot.
Oh, wow.
He's got really good stage presence because some of the videos are up on YouTube. And
Yeah.
I was impressed by him as a frontman.
Yeah, he's a really good frontman, but that's what he's been doing that for all his life.
Right.
So and
I like his voice for the band too.
Yeah, it's good, and it's not Ted and it's not Kendall, but it's you'll have to judge when you hear the next record, because obviously Steve is but I can tell you. And again, we didn't know what he would sound like, recorded.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously he did a great job for us live, but the true test is, how did they do in the studio? And I can tell you on some of the new songs that we're working on, he sounds amazing. He sounds really good.
I'm excited to hear this because I like this lineup. I like the fact that you, Ken Mary, and Archer are in place. And I think you got a young shredder guitar player who plays with a lot of melody. and I like the frontman because what I've seen of him on YouTube, he sounds good and he's a terrific frontman and he seems like he's really into it.
Oh yeah, he loves it, and he's like the easiest going. He's like whatever. He goes, you guys just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it.
That's great.
You know, there's no lead singer disease with
right.
Steve.
No, that's cool because you have a background with the guy and you know him a long time. So what could we expect from this album? When do you think it'll be out? Just tell us a little bit about it without divulging too much.
Well, I would say that we're probably about maybe halfway into production. We got probably about half a dozen songs that are almost finished. We have sent 3 over to Yop at the label, and he loves them. And then Ken's kind of preparing 4 more, which he'll send over, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So we're getting there. With all with just the state of COVID and the pandemic and everything, it's just we're not moving as fast as we would like, but we're kind of hoping to have the whole thing done by the end of this year. Well, obviously that's not going to happen, so it'll definitely be released next year sometime.
Yeah, I'm guessing they want to get you over to Europe to play some shows in the summer at that time.
Well, yeah. Well, who knows? I mean, who knows?
Oh, I know.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen with everything.
Everything is so up in the air right now. Who knows if any of that is even going to happen? And I don't. And the other issue is again, because of the pandemic, vinyl production is like way behind. I mean, we're talking like 6-7 months.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that.
From the time that you place the order. And for us, vinyl is a crucial part of our marketing campaign because the majority of our fan base, they want vinyl. I mean, we can always do like a digipack, release, but
just don't let Amazon put out those CDRs like they did of the last record.
Oh yeah, that's right. They screwed up a bunch of those, didn't they?
Oh boy, and I was one. I was one of the. It was the first place that offered the new record at the time on in the American market, so I jumped on it. And unbeknownst to me, I already saw people posting on Facebook and on all these. They're CDRs. They're not silver press CDs. And then there was the whole thing that the silver press CDs were out in Europe, but Amazon was mass producing CDRs, and yeah, it was.
I don't know how all of that happened. I don't know how all that worked, but I think the people at Nuclear Blast put an end to that. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, we're hoping for a early summer release, but who knows? With the way things are, and I'm not sure when it's going to be when we actually deliver the masters, to the label.
Right.
I mean, and at this point, especially with because with the way things are happening over Europe, I'm not sure that there's any big rush.
Right.
6 months ago we were thinking, it's all going to be blow over by next year, and it's not.
Right. Here we are going into 2022, and it's still going.
It's like we're going round in circles here.
Right.
I mean,
seems to be that's the way it's designed. We're not getting too deep into that whole thing, but yeah.
Right. Last 4 months ago, I was like really hopeful that we would be out touring by next summer. Now I'm beginning to like, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm being optimistic. I am very happy to hear that this lineup is intact because I like it a lot, and I'm glad to hear that there's new music coming. So I will be patient.
Well, and at this point, it's like, why rush it?
Absolutely.
I would rather make sure that that every song is strong, just like on on the past 3 albums. We are not going to, just so we can get out there and tour, we are not going to sacrifice, or never will, the quality of our music.
Right.
And and that's why, we haven't made a lot of records, but they're all really good.
Well, that's the thing now. Now with there really is a legacy of this band of like a immaculate record. So you don't want to disrupt that at this stage of the game.
No, not at all. So you're gonna like it. You're gonna like it. Again, there's gonna be there'll be some what you would call is like a called Fifth Angel song that's going to sound more like the other albums.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to hear some songs that are going to be a little more progressive, And I think every band, there has to be some evolution. You have to evolve as artists and musicians, yet still trying to retain that sound. But like some of the stuff that Ken is writing it's really cool. I have this will be the first album where I have like more than one song. I will probably have at least 4 of my song ideas,
nice.
Maybe 5. So, I'm a little bit more of a progressive, composer, and so is Ken. So there's going to be some pretty heavy, dark stuff.
Interesting.
It's going to be cool.
Well, Ken Mary is a guy that has been on so many different albums and been so many different bands, and he's such a great player. I can imagine the amount of things he could bring to the table as a songwriter with all the different bands and projects he's been involved with over the last 30 some odd years.
He brings everything to the table.
That's what I figured.
He's one of those guys. He does it all. Obviously he's a world-class drummer, but
he's actually a good singer too.
Yeah, he's not bad.
Yeah, I've heard him on some things. He had a couple of projects out in the '90s, more like alternative-y sounding, but he could sing. I'm not saying he doesn't sound.
He's a good singer.
Yeah, he could sing.
He can sing, and that obviously helps in the songwriting process. So, but yeah, he is a really good songwriter, and he writes really cool music, and he writes really great lyrics. So he's just super talented, and of course he produces the records. He produced The Third Secret, and he's producing this one. He does it all. He's amazing.
Great. Well, John, you know what? Tom and I really appreciate the talk tonight. We're got a little bit, it's going over our time here. We don't want to keep you all night. But anyway, we do appreciate the talk, and we're really glad. Everybody should check out, of course, the newest album, The Third Secret from 2018, but also look forward to some brand new material in 2022 from Fifth Angel. And thanks again, John. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
John, it was a blast. I really appreciate it. You've been involved with one of my favorite bands of all times, and it was a great evening chatting with you.
Anytime.
Okay, take care, brother.
Thank you, John.
All right. Good night.
Good night.